My name's Emily Watson, and I'm 38. 3 months ago, my husband of 12 years, Ryan Mitchell, sent me a text that blew my entire world apart. I was ringing up a customer at my boutique in Toronto. It was just another busy afternoon when my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it, expecting maybe a reminder about picking up groceries or something normal. Instead, it was Ryan. The text said, "I'm leaving you and moving to Vancouver with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account, haha." I swear my heart stopped. I stood there, holding a credit card for Mrs. Thompson, a sweet older lady who comes in every week for scarves, and I had to act like everything was fine. I handed her the receipt, smiled and said, "See you next week," but inside I was screaming. 12 years of marriage were gone. Just like that, in a text message with a haha at the end. Who does that? I didn't cry, scream, or let my hands shake as I wrapped Mrs. Thompson's scarf in our signature blue tissue paper. But I felt rage bubbling up, mixed with a cold, sharp shock. How dare he? How dare he think he could walk away, take everything and laugh about it? I waited until the shop was empty, locked the door for a quick break, and read the text again to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. It was real. Ryan, the man I'd built a life, with whom I thought I knew was running off with some kid, and thought he'd leave me with nothing. I was furious, but I wasn't about to fall apart. I'd seen this coming, not the exact text, but the signs had been there for months, and I'd been preparing. Ryan had been acting strange for a while. He had late nights at his office job that didn't match his pay stubs. He suddenly locked his phone with a new password. Then there was the gym obsession. He started buying tight shirts, trying to look like he was still 25 when he's pushing 45 and his beer gut was showing. About 3 months before that text, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a dinner for two at the Keg, a fancy steakhouse downtown, on a night he swore he was working late. That's when I knew something was up. That same night, I opened a separate bank account at RBC in my name, only at a different branch. I started moving my personal savings there little by little so he wouldn't notice. The joint account, he thought he'd cleaned out. I'd made sure it only had enough to look normal, maybe 2 months' worth of deposits. The rest of my money, the real money, was safe, along with every shady receipt and weird bank statement I'd been collecting for a year. I sat in the back room of my boutique staring at his text and typed back, "Good luck." That's it. No begging, no crying, just those 2 words. I knew he was probably laughing, thinking he'd won, picturing me sobbing over his big exit. But I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. I called my lawyer, Sarah Bennett, a sharp woman I'd met 2 months ago after I found hotel charges on our visa for a weekend. Ryan claimed he was at a work conference. I'd gone to Sarah back then, just to be safe, and we'd started preparing. "It's time," I told her. "He just made his move." She didn't miss a beat. "The papers are ready. I'll file them tomorrow. Do you want him served in Vancouver?" I thought about it for a second, imagining Ryan's smug face when he got those papers. "No rush," I said. "Let him think he's won for now." Then another text came from Ryan. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." My little shop? The boutique I'd built from nothing. The one that paid our bills when his middle management job at some tech firm barely covered his car payments. The one I'd kept separate from our joint finances, because I'd always had a gut feeling I couldn't trust him completely. I read that text and laughed. Actually laughed because he had no idea what was coming. He thought he could mock me, call my business a hobby, and walk away with everything. But I'd been ready. I'd kept my boutique's profits in a separate account. The house we lived in, it was mine, inherited from my grandma, and I'd never let Ryan put his name on the deed, no matter how many times he hinted at it. That night I went home to our house in the Beaches, a cozy place I'd always loved, and started pulling together the paperwork Sarah would need. I found our old wedding photos in a drawer. Ryan looked so different back then, before he decided to chase his youth with some receptionist. These days, he was all about designer jeans that didn't fit right, trying to act cool with the 20-somethings at his office, using words like lit that sounded pathetic coming from him. My phone kept buzzing with more texts from him, each one worse than the last. "I've been planning this for months. Sophie understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine, maybe find someone more your age. And then I've already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really. I didn't reply. I just screenshotted every single one and sent them to Sarah. Let him keep talking, keep digging his hole deeper. Every word was evidence. Then came the kicker. Another text. By the way, I used the joint visa to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift, LOL. Oh, he thought he was so clever. I grabbed my phone and called the credit card company right then and there. Hi, this is Emily Watson. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. The rep, David, was super professional. Can you identify the charges, ma'am? I laid it all out. 2 first-class tickets to Vancouver, booked today hotel charges at the Fairmont Pacific. Rim and I need to remove my husband as an authorized user. When he asked for proof, I said I've got texts from him, admitting he used the card for his girlfriend's trip after emptying our bank account. I can forward them. David's voice had a hint of satisfaction when he said, "That's more than enough. I'll cancel the charges and remove him from the card." Ryan and Sophie were about to show up at the airport with nothing. No tickets, no hotel, just his stupid LOL to keep them company. I poured myself a glass of wine, an amazing Okanagan Valley Red I'd been saving, and sat there feeling a mix of anger and calm. I was mad, sure, but I was also ready. Ryan thought he'd broken me, but he'd just lit a fire. Tomorrow, he'd start learning what happens when you underestimate someone like me. I sat there with my glass of wine still reeling from Ryan's texts, the ones where he laughed about emptying our joint account and running off with Sophie, his 20-year-old girlfriend, like he'd pulled off some genius plan. I was pissed, the kind of angry where you want to throw something, but I also felt a weird clarity, like I'd been waiting for this moment. I wasn't about to let him think he'd gotten away with it. That night, after I called the credit card company and shut down his little Vancouver getaway, I stayed up late digging through every piece of evidence I'd been collecting for months. I had receipts, bank statements, and even screenshots of his shady Venmo payments to some random account I'd traced back to Sophie. I wasn't just mad. I was ready to make sure Ryan paid for every stupid choice he'd made. The next morning, my phone started blowing up with texts from him, and they were something else. He sent one that said, "What the hell did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets, and the hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me, Emily." I stared at it, feeling a mix of satisfaction and rage. He really thought he could use our joint visa for his midlife crisis vacation, and I'd just sit there and take it. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the text to Sarah, my lawyer, who was already building a case that would bury him. She called me right after, her voice calm but with an edge of excitement. "This is gold, Emily. He's admitting to using the card without your consent. I've got the divorce papers ready, and with these texts, we're filing for financial misconduct. Do you still want to wait to serve him?" I thought about it, picturing Ryan and Sophie stuck at some sketchy motel near Pearson Airport, their big Vancouver dreams in tatters. "Yeah," I said. "Let him sweat a bit longer." Then another text came from Ryan, and it made my blood boil. "Don't bother begging. Sophie and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my stuff later." Begging. He thought I was going to beg him to come back. I remembered meeting Sophie at his company's Christmas party last year. She was a young receptionist who laughed too loud at his dumb jokes and kept touching his arm like she thought she was subtle. She was barely out of university, young enough to be his kid, and naive enough to think she was the love of his life. I didn't text him back, but I did call my bank again just to double-check that joint account. The rep confirmed Ryan had taken everything about 10 grand, which was exactly what I'd left in there to keep him from getting suspicious. My real money, the savings from my boutique, was safe in my RBC account, untouchable. I'd been moving funds for weeks, ever since I found those hotel charges on our visa. I wasn't stupid. I'd known something was coming. By noon, Ryan sent another text, and this one was just cruel. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." My little shop. The boutique I'd started from scratch. The one that was pulling in more money than his job at that tech firm ever did. I'd opened it 10 years ago, back when Ryan used to complain about my late nights, calling it my cute hobby, while I was hustling to build something real. I'd always kept its profits separate, thank God, because I'd never fully trusted him, not deep down. That text made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because he was so clueless. He thought he could mock me, act like my business was nothing, and I'd just curl up and cry. Instead, I sent that text to Sarah too, adding it to the pile of evidence that was going to sink him. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. It was Ryan's mom, Barbara Mitchell, calling from her place in Mississauga. I almost didn't pick up, but I was curious. "Emily, dear." She started, her voice soft and pitying. "Ryan told us everything, how you've been so controlling, how you pushed him away. He says you're being vindictive now, messing with his travel plans." I put her on speaker while I unpacked a new shipment of handbags at the boutique, letting her talk. Controlling me. I'd been the one keeping our life together, while Ryan was out chasing his youth. I cut her off, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Barbara, did he tell you he emptied our joint account and used our visa to book a trip with his girlfriend?" "I've got his texts. He want me to read them. The one where he brags about taking our money, or the one where he laughs about my age." There was a long silence, and then she mumbled something about how Ryan said I'd left him no choice, that I'd been cold. I wasn't having it. "Barbara, I've got a lawyer, and she's advised me to keep contact with Ryan's family, to a minimum during the proceedings. I've got to go." I hung up, feeling a rush of power. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was in control. Later that afternoon, Sarah called with an update. "I've got the emergency hearing set for Monday. With Ryan's texts and the credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze any assets he's got left." "Has he been served yet?" I told her no, but I knew he'd get the papers soon, probably at whatever cheap motel he and Sophie were crashing at. Sarah laughed. "Oh, and Sophie's been posting on Instagram about their adventure. She's calling you jealous and bitter in her stories. It's like she's handing us evidence on a silver platter." I couldn't help but smile. Sophie thought she was living some fairy tale, but she was about to learn what happens when you hitch your wagon to a guy like Ryan. I spent the rest of the day at the boutique helping customers, acting like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was buzzing with a mix of anger and determination. Ryan thought he'd played me, but every move he made was just tightening the noose. That night, I got one more text from him. "You think you're so smart, but I've got copies of the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine." I read it and laughed out loud. My boutique was incorporated in my name, only funded by my savings, built by my work. Ryan had never lifted a finger for it, never invested a dime. I forwarded the text to Sarah, who texted back, "He's delusional. This is going to be fun." I went to bed that night, not scared, not broken, but ready. Ryan had no idea the storm he'd unleashed, and I was just getting started. So Monday morning rolled around, and I stood outside the Superior Court of Justice in Toronto, ready for the emergency hearing that was about to turn Ryan's world upside down. I was nervous, my stomach in knots, but I was also ready for this. I'd spent the weekend pulling together every piece of evidence, every text, every receipt, every bank statement that showed exactly who Ryan was and what he'd done. He thought he could send that smug text, "empty our joint account," and run off with Sophie like some big shot. But today was the day he'd learn he wasn't as smart as he thought. I walked into that courthouse with Sarah, my lawyer, by my side, and I felt a fire in me, like I was done being the quiet wife who let him walk all over her. Ryan showed up looking like he'd just stepped out of a bad midlife crisis movie, wearing tight designer jeans and a blazer that screamed trying too hard. Sophie was there too, waiting outside the courtroom, looking all of 20 in a bright pink dress that didn't scream courthouse vibes. I didn't even glance at her. I was focused. Sarah started laying out our case, and it was like watching a master at work. She showed the judge Ryan's texts, the one where he said, "I've already emptied our joint account, ha ha," and the one where he bragged about using our visa for his and Sophie's Vancouver trip. She pulled up bank records, showing the 10 grand he'd taken, the hotel charges, the first-class tickets, all of it. Every piece of evidence was a nail in his coffin, and I could see Ryan squirming in his seat, his face getting redder by the second. His lawyer, some guy who looked like he'd been hired last minute, tried to spin it. He stood up and said, "Your Honor, my client admits to some rash decisions, but Miss Watson's actions have been vindictive, canceling his travel plans and making things difficult." I almost laughed out loud. Vindictive Sarah didn't even let him finish. She jumped in, her voice sharp but calm. Vindictive. My client protected her assets when she discovered her husband's financial misconduct. She maintained detailed records of his suspicious behavior for a year. That's not vindictive. That's smart. She handed the judge a folder with everything I'd collected from the keg dinner receipt to the hotel charges from months ago, all proving Ryan had been planning this for a while. The judge, an older woman with glasses who didn't look like she was in the mood for nonsense, flipped through the papers, her face getting sterner with every page. Then Sarah dropped the big one. "Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell also claims entitlement to my client's boutique, a business established before their marriage and maintained with strict separation of finances. We have incorporation papers, tax records, and bank statements proving Miss Watson funded and operated it independently." I watched Ryan's face as Sarah spoke, and it was like the air went out of him. He'd really thought he could waltz in and claim half my business, the one I'd built while he was mocking it as my little shop. The judge looked at Ryan directly and said, "Mr. Mitchell, you admitted in writing to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with another individual. Do you deny this?" Ryan mumbled something, shifting in his seat, but his lawyer looked defeated. "I was just trying to make a clean break," Ryan finally said, and the judge raised an eyebrow. "By committing financial fraud," she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. I sat there feeling a mix of anger and triumph. I was angry because Ryan had the nerve to think he could get away with this, and triumphant because every stupid move he'd made was coming back to bite him. The judge kept going, looking at Ryan's lawyer now. "And you're claiming rights to property that documentation clearly shows is separate from marital assets." Ryan's lawyer tried to argue that the boutique grew during our marriage, so Ryan deserved a share, but Sarah shut that down fast. The business was established before the marriage, and my client kept every penny separate. We have records of every dollar invested, and earned, none of which came from Mr. Mitchell. I could see the realization hitting Ryan, like he was finally understanding how badly he'd underestimated me. All those times he'd laughed at my bookkeeping, called me obsessive for keeping my business separate, and now it was saving me. The judge didn't take long to make her decision. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct by Mr. Mitchell. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Mitchell is ordered to return any funds removed from the joint account within 24 hours. Ryan's face went pale, and he blurted out, "But that money's gone, we spent it." The judge didn't even blink. "Then I suggest you find a way to replace it," she said, her voice like ice. And Mr. Mitchell, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund personal trips with individuals outside the marriage. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, like I could finally breathe again. Ryan thought he'd walk away with everything, maybe even half my boutique, but instead he was leaving that courtroom with nothing but a court order hanging over his head. As we walked out, I heard Sophie outside, her voice whiny, asking Ryan what happened to their Vancouver plans. He snapped something at her, but I didn't stick around to listen. I kept walking, my heels clicking on the marble floor, feeling stronger than I had in years. Sarah grabbed my arm and grinned. "That went better than I expected. He's got nothing left to stand on." I nodded, still processing it all, but I knew this wasn't the end. Ryan wasn't the type to go down quietly, but I was ready for whatever he tried next. I'd spent a year preparing for this, and I wasn't about to let him take me down now. I walked out of the Superior Court of Justice, feeling like I'd just won a war I didn't even want to fight. Ryan was left with nothing but a court order to pay back the 10 grand he'd stolen from our joint account, and I could tell from the look on his face that he was starting to realize he'd messed up big time. I wasn't celebrating. Not exactly, but I felt a weight lift off me, like I could finally focus on my life instead of his chaos. The weeks after that hearing were wild. My boutique in Toronto was busier than ever, and word about what happened started spreading like wildfire. Customers were coming in, not just to buy stuff, but to tell me they'd heard about Ryan's stunt and how I'd handled it. One woman, Linda, bought a $300 handbag and said, "Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them." I nodded because she was right. Ryan thought he'd leave me with nothing, but I was building something bigger than he could ever understand. Meanwhile, Ryan was falling apart, and I got updates through mutual friends and his sister, Lauren Mitchell, who started reaching out after the hearing. Apparently, Ryan and Sophie were crashing at her tiny condo in Etobicoke, and the glamorous Vancouver escape he'd promised her wasn't happening. Lauren showed up at my boutique one day, looking embarrassed, and said, "I owe you an apology, Emily. Ryan told us you were controlling, that you drove him away. But after seeing those texts and how he acted, I'm ashamed we believed him." I was arranging a display of new scarves, barely looking up, because I didn't need her validation anymore. But she kept going, telling me how Ryan's personal credit cards were maxed out, how he couldn't afford the motel after I canceled his visa charges, and how Sophie was posting cryptic Instagram stories about toxic relationships. I shrugged and said, "Sounds like he's learning the hard way." Lauren bought a scarf before she left, almost like she was trying to make up for something, but I didn't care. My focus was on my business, not their family drama. Sarah, my lawyer, kept me in the loop about Ryan's next moves, and they were desperate. He tried filing a motion to claim my boutique was his idea, saying he'd invested money in it back when I started. I laughed when Sarah told me, because the only thing Ryan ever invested was complaints about my long hours. My boutique was funded by my savings, incorporated in my name, and I had every receipt to prove it. Sarah shut his claim down before it even got to a hearing, and the judge warned him about wasting the court's time. Ryan's career was tanking too. His tech firm launched an HR investigation into his relationship with Sophie, since she was a receptionist there, and it didn't look good. He got a formal reprimand, and the promotion he'd been banking on went to someone else. I heard through a friend that he was stuck in the same dead-end role, barely scraping by, and living off Sophie's entry-level salary wasn't the high life he'd imagined. Then there was Sophie. I didn't expect to hear from her, but one day she walked into my boutique looking nervous, clutching her purse like it was a shield. I was helping a customer, but I saw her out of the corner of my eye and braced myself. She waited until the shop was quiet, then came up to me and said, "Emily, I owe you an apology. I believed Ryan when he said you were cold, that you didn't support him. But then I saw how he acted when things fell apart, trying to manipulate me the same way." I kept stacking new earrings on a display, not saying much because what was there to say? She kept going, her voice shaky. "He moved into my condo after the hearing, kept saying it was temporary, but then he started complaining about my place, saying I should take out a loan for something bigger. That's when I realized he was just using me. I finally looked at her and said, 'Sophie, he didn't have dreams. He had escapes. There's a difference.'" She nodded, tears in her eyes, and said she'd kicked him out and was dating someone her own age now. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not really, because she'd made her choices, but I got it. Ryan had a way of making people think he was their ticket to something better. My boutique, though. It was thriving. I opened a second location in Mississauga, and the Toronto store was getting so much foot traffic, I had to hire 2 new employees. Women were coming in, saying they'd read about my story in a local paper, not as a scorned wife, but as a businesswoman who'd outsmarted her ex. I started an online store too, and orders were coming in from Vancouver to Halifax. Ryan's texts didn't stop, though. He'd send pathetic messages swinging between anger and begging. One said, "You've ruined everything, Emily. You'll regret this." Another was, "I never meant to hurt you. Can't we work something out?" I didn't reply, just forwarded them to Sarah, who said every message was another gift for our case. I heard through Lauren that Sophie had dumped him for good, and Ryan was back at his parents' place in Mississauga, sleeping in his old bedroom at 45. The guy who'd mocked my age was now the one stuck in the past while I was moving forward, building something real. 2 years after Ryan's text message blew up my life, I stood in front of a crowd at a women's business conference in Montreal, not talking about divorce or betrayal, but about building something unstoppable. My boutique chain had grown to 5 locations across Canada, from Toronto to Vancouver, and I was employing 30 people, getting featured in national magazines like Chatelaine. All I could think about was how Ryan thought his haha would break me. That text is framed in my office now, not because I'm hung up on the pain, but because it's proof of how far I've come. I was up there on stage sharing my story, and a woman in the crowd asked about keeping business and personal finances separate, saying her husband thinks she's paranoid for wanting to protect her assets. I looked her in the eye and said, "My ex said the same thing, right up until he tried to claim half my boutique in our divorce. Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia." I told her to set up separate accounts, keep detailed records, and never let anyone make her feel small for being careful. Another woman raised her hand, asked how I stayed strong when everything fell apart, and I told her it's about knowing your worth and refusing to let someone else define it. The room clapped, and I felt a rush, not of anger anymore, but of pride, because I wasn't just surviving. I was inspiring other women to be smarter, stronger, better. A few weeks ago, a young woman, Mia, walked into my Toronto boutique looking at handbags, but really there for advice. She'd heard my story through a friend and said, "I'm starting a small business, but my boyfriend thinks I should share everything with him." Your story made me rethink that. I stopped arranging a display and sat her down, told her to keep her business in her name, only to treat it like her own empire. She left with a $200 purse and a notebook full of tips, and I realized my story was reaching people, changing how they see themselves. That's bigger than any revenge. Then last month, I ran into an old college friend, Rachel, at the boutique. She'd read about me in a local paper and said, "Emily, I always knew you were tough, but you're a legend." We laughed over coffee, and she told me how my story pushed her to renegotiate her own business partnership to protect her assets. Moments like that hit me hard, because it's not just about me anymore. Women walk into my stores now, not just to shop, but to share their own stories of standing up, rebuilding, moving forward. And I'm part of that. It's humbling, but it's also powerful. Ryan's a footnote now. I hear through friends he's living in a basement apartment in Mississauga, working a low-paying admin job after his tech firm downsized him. His dating profile's still out there, calling himself young at heart, but nobody's buying it. He tried contacting me last month, sent a text saying, "I miss what we had, Emily," but I didn't reply, just blocked his number. Sophie's a regular at my Toronto store, now running her own social media business, and she told me once, "You showed me how to build something real, not chase empty promises." Even Barbara, Ryan's mom, came to my flagship store's 5-year anniversary party, wearing a dress she bought from me, and said, "You taught our family a lesson, Emily, about enabling bad behavior." Ryan's still blaming everyone but himself. But we're done making excuses. I didn't need her words, but they hit me anyway, because my story's bigger than Ryan's betrayal. It's about every woman who walks into my boutique, hears what I went through, and decides she's worth more than some guy's midlife crisis. I think back to that text, the one that was supposed to crush me, and I realize it didn't end me. It set me free. I took that pain and built an empire. 5 boutiques. A team of 30. A legacy that's changing lives. Ryan thought he was writing my ending, but all he did was hand me the pen to write a better story. The one where I'm not just getting even, I'm getting better, and showing other women they can too.